Hope everybody is doing well. Coming at y'all this particular Wednesday afternoon from the Hayti Heritage Center, where they'll be doing a candlelight event later on. One of those candlelight music series that is very popular around the country. I believe this one will be involving Christmas music and even some of the music from the Nutcracker and other things along those lines. So it ought to be a fun event and definitely two shows, a lot of audience that will be here and all along that way. So it ought to be a real enjoyable time, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing some of the music, seeing the crowd, and all in that space. So it ought to be fun. And of course, we did have our holiday party earlier today, so got to go to a Mexican restaurant that I think has been open for a year, but I had not been there yet. And I can tell you that Mascalados was actually pretty good. So if you're in the area of Durham and you want some good Mexican food, I would recommend it going by there because the food wasn't that bad. Of course, it might have been a certain crowd of staff and everything, so definitely the staff was decent. It wasn't one of the better staffs, but it wasn't one of the worst either. But definitely a good time with the food, and they even gave a little birthday shout to one of my coworkers, and all in that space. So they gave a little bit of Latin music and gave him some rhythm, and all in that kind of way. So that was fun to see as well. And of course, as y'all know, I just recently came back from Reedsville, North Carolina, a couple of days ago, where they did the Road to the Apollo, which is a salute to veterans, but also a way for many performers to get to the Apollo. And I think there was about five winners that were picked, including two veterans. They got inducted automatically in because they're veterans, and that's part of what Captain Newborn is doing with these events. He is bringing awareness to veteran issues and all along those lines. And then in talking to him yesterday, he added two more. We oftentimes joke that sometimes, even though there were like 23 contestants and only two got booed off the stage, that sometimes it seems like a whole army go to these trips to New York to get the chance to perform on the real Apollo stage, and in some cases even get some television deals. Because I know some people have appeared that have been on the show and gone on to Tyler Perry shows as well as other shows, including doing some performances at some of our local ball teams, as well as other things that come out of this activity. And this has been going on for 10 years. So celebrating a 10-year anniversary and all along those lines. So there's a lot of those things that are happening, and it's always fun having these things happen here, right here in Durham, North Carolina. But I also enjoy meeting audience members and other folks that are from other parts of the world. So I've got a guest today from Washington, and I know we've got Little Washington here, and of course there's Washington D.C., meaning Little Washington, North Carolina. But I'm talking about the state of Washington and all in that space. So it's a little bit earlier for him. It might be mid-afternoon. But this particular gentleman that I'm getting ready to bring on to the stage was definitely something that I know a lot of people can relate to. And I hate to say that people can relate to it even in these holiday times, because it is a part of the community that we pay a lot of attention to and that we're very concerned about. Some people think that we don't pay enough attention to this part of the population, which is the homeless population. And I do know that my guest was a homeless teenager, but now he owns a home. He was also a high school dropout, but now he's an attorney, and he was even an alcoholic. But today he's doing a lot of work helping kids and even helping some people get out of some of these kind of situations and all along those lines. So he's been doing a lot, including even being, which I find interesting, an attorney by profession and maybe even an attorney by day. But apparently at nighttime, he's a punk rocker. And yeah, we even got some punk rockers here as well, and they like that punk rock kind of community. I'm actually going to tease him as I bring him onto the stage, because I think the first time that I dealt with punk rock and all along those lines was when I was at Marquette, and that's actually the shirt that I'm wearing today. And we were number 3, and now we're number 8, I believe, in the country after losing to our arch rival in that particular state, Wisconsin. But we did beat Texas, which is the team that Shaka Smart got. And I remember as a youngster in the early 80s going to a campus party, a house party for lack of a better term, and everything, and seeing people literally running into each other. I believe some of you punk rockers call it slam dancing, and I'm going like, there's a culture shock to a young man from rural North Carolina going like, these folks are trying to hurt each other. They are literally running into each other. So I was not used to that at that particular time, and all along those lines. It was definitely catching me off guard, and I think that's my first introduction into some of the scene of punk rock. And I know that it's much more than that and all along those lines. And it's also part of the counterculture movement as well. But Chris, glad you were able to join us on this particular day. And if you want to share a little bit about some of the narratives that I just shared, and of course, I've got some other questions as well. But yeah, a lot of folks are shocked by punk rock and that whole nature. So share a little bit with me about your experience being punk rocker and all in that space.
Yeah, what's going on, Mark? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, glad.
Um, yeah, so I grew up here in Seattle. I was born here in Seattle. I grew up a city kind of south of here called Tacoma. That's kind of a little blue collar GI town, big base. A lot of, like I said, blue collar. Kind of just gritty industrial sort of town outside of Seattle. And yeah, I grew up. Wasn't that interested in school. Wasn't that interested in. I was interested in skateboarding. I was interested in music, and I wound up dropping out of high school, and later on, I wound up going to law school and becoming an attorney. Along the way, I did a lot of drinking, a lot of drug use, a lot of hanging around the music scene here in Seattle, in Tacoma, and I felt like I had an interesting voice. I'd been writing my whole life. I started writing these books a while ago, and I ended up writing these three novellas, and it's combined volume. It's called the Down and Out in Seattle and Tacoma series, and it really chronicles the deterioration of a Gen X music scene guy here in the Pacific Northwest. He's got pretty severe mental health issues. He suffers from homelessness at points in the book. He certainly suffers from drug addiction and alcoholism. And also, I used to be a workers' rights attorney, and I represented plaintiffs in discrimination and wrongful termination actions and wage theft claims. I went to work for the city of Seattle in the prosecutor's office, and what we do there is misdemeanors, and I get to see that what who's committing these sorts of misdemeanor crimes is. It's really, it's a tough situation because it's mostly people that are suffering from homelessness or near homelessness, people that are suffering from substance abuse disorder, and or people that are suffering with mental health challenges. So it gave me an interesting perspective on how to actually kind of wind down the book when the character starts to seriously deteriorate. Um, so yeah, that's a quick and
No, I
dirty.
appreciate that and everything. I'm definitely going to get into some uh, down in the weeds and more of the details of that and everything. But even here in North Carolina, I literally live around the corner from Duke and am closer to downtown at this particular cultural arts center than I'm at, and all along those lines. But oftentimes we will see people that are living in tent cities, even in a small city like Durham. And of course, we've seen a lot of military folks that are involved in homelessness as well. So I was just wondering if you have some thoughts, and I know that the West Coast, because I do have friends in San Francisco and other places, that the homeless problem seems to be very major. And in some places, even though we just came out of the COVID pandemic, and some people will say that we are definitely easing more and more out of it, but the homeless problem has been in my mind, an epidemic as well. So I was just wondering your take as to why the homeless issue is such a big issue. Because, like I said, you did in some of the bios that I've read about you mention being even homeless as a teenager, and I can only imagine what that would be like. Even though I've had some moments where I've struggled to have my own home and all along those lines. So even though I have a good home and a good family and all in that space, so I was just wondering your thoughts as to why this issue is so prevalent in our society.
Yeah, I definitely did. I was homeless for a long time when I was a teenager, and I was actually kind of, I would say, near homelessness well into adulthood, where I had a car, at points in time, and I would kind of just couch surf from here to there. Even once I kind of started to get my feet under me, I lived in, uh, like government subsidized housing downtown Tacoma. So dealing, like the residents there, along with myself, dealing with a lot of substance use disorder, alcoholism, mental health, challenges, obviously socioeconomic challenges, and so that was when I was younger, and now I'm a grandfather. I'm almost 50. I have some distance from that personally, but what I do for work, and I go downtown pretty much every day, and Seattle is suffering from a very large homelessness problem, and also suffering from a lack of social safety net. It's just not there. So as like a prosecutor in the city attorney's office, all we do is misdemeanors. And other than the traffic stuff, the other misdemeanor crimes that we're dealing with, we're talking about like, somebody walking into the Second Avenue Target and walking out with a bunch of stuff. That person is almost invariably going to be suffering from substance use disorder, homelessness, and or mental health challenges. Same with, the assaults, the harassments, the petty street level crime is being perpetrated by a certain group of people, and it's a group of people that don't have any resources. So they're prosecuted, they go to King County Jail for a little bit, a couple of weeks or something. They get out. There's still no resources there for them. There's no social safety net. We're just essentially pushing them back out onto a downtown street with nowhere to go and nothing to do. And of course, you know what I mean. Like, to get by, people are going to recommit the same sorts of things that they were doing before. And I think that COVID obviously really brought the situation to a head. I mean, there's always been homelessness issue in Seattle, and I'm sure every other big or even smaller city, but it's a lot worse. There's definitely tent cities all over the place, and it's that, and there's not, the only tool that I have is as an attorney, but it's not the right tool for the job. We just don't have that tool. The tool doesn't exist. It's not here. So, yeah.
That's interesting and everything. I was just wondering, because I do know you have this book, you mentioned it earlier and everything. How much is the book based on your own life? Because I do know that there's that character, Jack, and I just wondering how much is the down and out character based on your own life. And I'm also imagining that both as an attorney, and if you're like me, you're a gregarious person, you probably just talk to people in general, and it might even be based on some experiences of folks that you have met that aren't necessarily your own life and everything around that nature. So I just wondered how much of the book is based on your own story of real life.
You're right. I talk to everyone. I go no matter where I go, it's like somehow I end up in a conversation. I mean, like, I was sitting in court, and I know every court staff person that works at Seattle Municipal Court like intimately, because like when we're on recess, I'll just start talking. You know what I mean? And but yeah, I mean, so. I think to me, it's like, so the stories are definitely fiction, but they're heavily informed by my own experience. I don't think that, I mean, there are definitely a lot of people that write like semi-autobiographical or just strictly autobiographical books, memoirs, etc. I never write those sorts of things. I'm always writing a story, but the thing is that it's like it's pretty hard to disconnect the person and their experiences from the story that they're telling. So to me, there's a lot of me in there, but it's not me. The character in the book, Jack, he suffers from things like alcoholism and mental health and homelessness in quantities much greater than myself. So I definitely, identify as an alcoholic. I've been sober for a very long time. I don't really identify as a drug addict. I have some mental health issues, anxiety, depression diagnosis, but not the sorts of, like severe issues that the character in the book suffers from. So to me, like I've always thought of like, there's a narrator in the book and there's a character in the book, and they kind of speak over each other interchangeably. And I always think of like, them as kind of two different versions of the same person. The narrator is the, more well-spoken person who's kind of telling the story. The character is crude and uneducated, but not unintelligent. He's just, like a different version. He's what could have become of the narrator, or the narrator is what could have become of him. So I identify a lot with that, being of, kind of both minds there. But the story is a story, and I, kind of push these two versions of this person together to tell it.
Yeah, no, you were always a writer, because I know that even in my own life, I wrote for a mimeograph school paper that I put together. I think that was even in grade school and all along those lines. And I have definitely done some other writing as well. So I would say I've been a writer for a large portion of my life and everything, and still do some writing, even though I don't do nearly as much as I used to do and everything. But I was just wondering, has writing been something that you were always doing? Did you really enjoy writing, like maybe the English classes when you were going to school in Washington, or is writing something that you developed later? So when did you actually get involved in writing, and has this always been a passion of yours?
Yeah, I was always doing it even when I was a kid. I was always writing stuff down. I was, always writing like little, stories or writing pieces of dialogue, portions of conversations that just kind of popped into my head. I didn't really know what to do with them, but I thought they were interesting, so I'd write them down. I was always writing down story ideas. I used to have this thing. It was like it was a Halloween decoration. It was like a hollow plastic skull, and it's like I used to just there used to have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little strips of paper of like story ideas I'd written down, and I'd just toss them in the skull. And and most of the time that's all that ever became of them. But sometimes I would go through it and be like, "What is this?" I wouldn't know what this was, but I'd look at this and be like, "Oh, this was a good idea," and I'd sit down and write a story. So I've just been writing stories like that forever. I didn't write real great. Like certainly like getting an education, like greatly, like increase the quality of the work. But I was always writing. I was writing when I was a kid. I was writing, like when I dropped out of high school, I was writing in my 20s. I was writing when I got myself together and went to college. I was writing when I was in law school. I'm writing now. I'm always doing it.
Yeah. Well, how do you choose what you write about? Because a lot of what you write about seems to be very real world oriented and all along those lines. Or do you sometimes step out of the norm and write fantasy and things that are not as based on reality as some of the harsh realities that I know some of what you write about is
Yeah.
based on? But I just wondered, do you ever step out of the norm and write like fantasy or other things that are not always the hard hitting stuff? And how do you choose what you write about?
It's funny because like what I consume is mostly like science fiction, and horror. You know what I mean? So it's like horror movies. Like that's all I'm ever watching is like low budget horror movies. We have like a Scarecrow Video near my house here in Seattle. It's like the biggest video store in the world, and they have just everything that you could imagine. And I go in there and I like rent horror movies, and I rent stuff that the staff are like, oh, what's this about? I'm like, so I always feel like like that should have been my job rather than being an attorney. I should have gone to work at the video store, but I don't know if I'd be able to support my wife and kids working at the video store. But then in science fiction, that's what I consume: science fiction and horror. But like what I write, it's not always like so much based on like on my life experiences, but I almost always write stuff about normal people in fairly like normal circumstances. I just think that there's a better, more real story to tell, about normal people doing normal things. And I think that, creating like, experiences and drama, like with, just, what happens in people's ordinary lives is, I think some people think it's challenging. I think that it's like the most compelling thing to write about. And when I start writing, I never really know what it's going to be about. I don't really have an outline for a story. I usually just sit down, I have an idea, and I just start knocking out a couple paragraphs about, like this is such and such person doing such and such thing. Then what happens, and I just kind of let, the characters kind of just take me on a ride.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to bring in one of our other guests. Like I said, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three, but I want to bring in Doug Brinker. He is a veteran and definitely involved in the veteran space. And like I said, even the Road to the Apollo is a salute to veterans. And I know that Doug Brinker is a disabled Iraq veteran. I think that he's been through a number of things in that space, but he's also one that deals with making sure that our veterans are dealing with mental health and all along those lines. So both of you, I would consider to be survivors and all in that space. So I would definitely love to have Doug join at the end of the conversation and even share a little about his story as well. So Doug, glad you're able to join us. And I've got Chris Stockwell with us as well. And in both cases, because Chris went through some things in the homeless population as a teenager and is now a successful attorney. And I know that you served in the military. And like I said earlier, my friend Captain Newborn, ironically, that is his first name, not his rank, because I don't think he ever served in the military, but his parents, maybe they had aspirations or whatever, but they gave him that name. And I think the family has had that name for 3 generations, but he is a veteran advocate. And we've been doing this Road to the Apollo, which is partially around finding talent, but also around veteran advocacy, because even sometimes talks about the lead water down in, I believe it was Cape, one of the Camp Lejeune, that was definitely contaminated and impacted a lot of people down in that area and all along those lines. But I just wondering your take on the plight of the veterans, because we know that even some of the veterans can fall in this homeless situation as well. And we do know that there is a lot of concerns around mental health as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your narrative and a little bit of your story as well.
Well, thank you, Mark. Chris, nice meeting you. It's an honor. This is my very first podcast guest.
Good to meet you.
So a quick backstory. I actually was homeless by choice when I returned in November of 2004. I chose to, that following summer, summer going into early fall, I chose to be homeless because of pride, because of honor. You know, my core values from the military. And I didn't want my mom and stepdad and friends to know that I didn't have a place to go, even though I knew they offered up places. And so that was my struggle. And thankfully.
Just really quickly, in that same kind of philosophy, because I can relate to that to some degree, because I know that, rents are due and sometimes you get caught in a pinch and all along those lines. And I remember it was maybe about 10 or 12 years ago, literally being, for lack of a better term, evicted out of the apartment and all in that space. So I did spend, I think it was a day in a shelter and all along those lines, a day or two. And then also maybe spent a day or two just kind of like trying to find any space that I could find. I think there might have even been living outside and even being outside near a church. And it might have even been the fall or something like that. And we were having one of our relatively mild North Carolina falls. But to your point, Doug, I think part of it was pride. And we know that a lot of times they say pride comes before the fall. And I did eventually find a place. But yeah, I think there was like a period of, it wasn't long, maybe 2 or 3 days that I was doing what you're talking about and just trying to survive the best way I could, including putting myself in the shelter for a day or two. So to both of you gentlemen, do you think that that is sometimes what happens even with some of these people that decide to go to tent cities? Because I do know some folks even here in Durham, North Carolina, that live in these tent cities and will sometimes create tent cities underneath bridges, sometimes out in wooded areas or a number of other places. So I was wondering, do you sometimes feel that people are afraid to ask for help, and in some cases when they do ask for help they don't get the support that they would like? Because I know a friend of mine just recently moved to a new apartment, but he was under the threat of being homeless, and I know he reached out to churches, he reached out to a number of other organizations that you would think would be helpful, but they weren't as helpful as he was hoping and all in that space. So I know that there are institutions that are supposed to be helpful, but sometimes they have their own rules and regulations, and we don't always want to follow those rules and regulations. And sometimes I think their rules and regulations may be problematic, but that's just my own thoughts and everything. But I just wanted y'all's take around this notion of pride, and also if the community in general is doing enough to support our folks that are being homeless. So I'll start with you, Doug, but I definitely want to hear from Chris as well.
So I actually slept in my vehicle for 5 months before my hometown of Jackson, Michigan, and the Community Action Agency Veterans Housing Program reached out and helped me out and put me up in a nice apartment for 3 years before I actually moved over to Eastern Michigan University campus to begin my bachelor's work in marketing and communication. But way prior to going back, into the mid 90s, before I made my first attempt at suicide, I struggled significantly. My book is in the final stages. Dorrance Publishing, I will sign a contract with this Friday, and sometime this next year, my dark shadow, Living a Suicidal Self, will be released.
Yeah. Chris, if you'll answer that question as well, and I've got to go open the door because, like I said, I'm in my business as well. But if y'all will continue the conversation, I'll be right back in literally 1 minute.
Yeah. No, I think the when I was like, this is the '90s. I was a homeless teenager when in the very early like 1991. But later on, when I was in my 20s, I did a lot of like living in my car and couch surfing. And, at the time, it just wasn't, it seemed fine to me to do what I was doing. I was definitely kind of homeless by choice, like you were saying, Doug. And, I just now today, it's like I try to apply that experience and figure out what, my thoughts are about what's going on, like here in Seattle. Like there's definitely like tent cities all over the place, but it's like the I feel like, what I mean, like what's happened especially over the last few years is that there's been like a lot of people will get like say like evicted from like their place that they're living. And it's kind of like like a rung on the ladder. It's like because we see like here it's like we see a lot of near homelessness, so we see like tons of like people living in vehicles, a lot of RVs. But then what I mean, you start to see like tents, and it's like I feel like it's just kind of like a like a drop from here to here to here. And I mean, here in Seattle, it's like we have like some places like some of the old downtown hotels where they've like housed people. We got a lot of these tiny house villages around town. But you know what I mean, like we don't have like like the capacity, like we don't have like a an apparatus to actually like deal with the influx of like people into the city that are suffering from these issues. And if we're talking about the housing issue, we're still ignoring the mental health issue. We're ignoring the possible substance use disorder issues that come along with that. And we don't have a solution to that either. And I know we didn't talk before this, but I'm a prosecutor at the city attorney's office now, and we do misdemeanors. And it's like, that's pretty much what we see is like people that are committing like misdemeanor crime are usually suffering from substance use disorder, or and I'm a recovered alcoholic too. Or they're suffering from mental health issues, or they're suffering from homelessness or near homelessness, or a lot of times they're suffering from all three. And housing is great, but like there's other things there. And it's like I can't speak for everywhere in the United States, but Seattle is is pretty is pretty liberal as far as like like providing services like that, and we can't keep up, you know what I mean? So I don't know what other places are doing, but we don't have an answer, you know what I mean, for what's going on.
So here in Michigan, my hometown of Jackson, Michigan, population around 30 to 35 within the city and about 138,000 within the county. But we have a tent city right downtown. I don't know, 20, 30 people maybe. I'm sure some of them are veterans. I know that we have a lot of we have programs that are working with homeless veterans currently. And in the state of Michigan, here just recently, I participated in the director's program, the MVA, Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency. The director and coupled with a legislator, they funded 13 $150,000 grants to 13 nonprofits to apply. And the agency that once helped me just received one of those $150,000 grants to address the homeless problem here in Jackson, Michigan. And we know I'm working with Command Sergeant Major Russell of the Michigan Army National Guard, Director Love, who's the new MVAA director. And we're going to make it a top priority in the state of Michigan to eradicate as much as possible veteran homelessness. And like you said, the substance abuse, mental health. I'm a veteran peer support at the very same agency that I went to for services after my first suicide attempt, August 7th, 1999. I am now an employed and have been 6 years this coming January 8th. I work for the same agency that I used to get services from. And that's even in my book. So yeah, mental health, substance abuse, homelessness, it's all bundled together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, cool. Just really quickly and everything. Hey, Douglas, you kind of mentioned it earlier, but how much is the issue of suicide a problem with our veterans and everything? Because I've definitely heard a lot of people. I know that even my friend is involved in that space talks about it, and I do know that even here on the network we have a show around bullying, and I do know that bullying is a issue in the country. I would argue that that might be an epidemic as well, but I do know that a lot of people are, you know, going through a lot in life, and sometimes they want to take themselves out, whether that is our military veterans or just people in general. But I just wanted your thoughts about the influx, and so I've heard the figures among our youth is ridiculously high and all in that space. But I just wanted your thoughts around why we are seeing such an influx in people that are interested in not being a part of society and even taking themselves out. And it seems like you have both maybe to some degree dealt with that. So I'd love to hear from both you and Chris as to the why we're seeing so many young people and just people in general that are frustrated and don't want to necessarily be part of this world that we live in.
So first part, we know just recently numbers came out, women's suicide rates for veterans is up 43% by gun.
Wow.
43% by firearm for women veterans. We know that well over 6,000 veterans a year take their life roughly every 83 to 87 minutes. Numbers aren't only captured by CDC and other organizations, the VA and such, but what about the unreporteds? So what I've understood, there's 4 death code certificate assignments by a coroner for suicide. If a family chooses, in my own VFW post 423 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of our past post commanders 21 weeks ago this Saturday in the Ann Arbor VA parking lot took his life by firearm. If we as a society are not doing more by getting 988 out into the communities, that's my big push, is for only 17% of the world, of the United States, knows what 988 even is. And from a veteran's perspective, it sickens me not only to be affected by it personally, besides my own attempts. I could have been one of those statistics twice. But more importantly, now learning that women turn to suicide probably because of military sexual trauma, probably because of bullying, like I went through a lot of my earlier years of life. We got to do something different. And I know there's probably a copycat factor involved with the suicide. I was just reading this morning that a Michigan teenager is being convicted once he becomes an adult because he cyberbullied a Texas teenager to complete suicide through video gaming. And Mr. Attorney, you probably may have heard that story. It's a Michigan teen and a Texas teen. They aren't releasing names, obviously, because of the minor age in the process. But yes, a Michigan teen cyberbullied through video gaming a Texas teenager into suicide completion.
And along those same lines, Chris, what is your thoughts? Because one of the groups that I am concerned about, I don't have any kids of my own, but I do have 2 nephews that are 14 and 15, and I've got a number of friends that have young kids that are even in their teens and in some cases 20s and 30s. And I do know that a lot of our young people are being cyberbullied, and they're also dealing with a lot of mental health issues that are sometimes leading them to suicide. And you are relatively young. I mean, I think you said you're about ready to hit one of those 5 numbers, maybe 50 or something like that. I'm actually getting ready to hit a little bit above 60s and 62 age myself and everything. But I just wanted your thoughts around the nature of how our youth are handling this as well.
Yeah, I wish that I could put my finger on like a reason why I thought that we were dealing with this, but it seems like, like at least in this millennia, it's like, like we hear a lot about like, like veteran suicides, but we're hearing like a lot about just, like suicide prevalence, like in society. We have like an intern in my office, just recently, she was there over the summer and, she was about to finish her, start her last year of law school. And, we found out a couple weeks ago that, she committed suicide and, no idea why. It seems like she has everything going for her, so it's like, obviously like, like mental health, disorder, is definitely going to factor into that. What I mean? It sounds like that may have been part of her issue, and I think that there's more people that, are suffering from, mental health issues than in the past. Like when I was growing up, it just seems like the world's got kind of like a cloud of doom and gloom on it. And it seems like we're kind of just inundated with a lot of information, and a lot of that information and platforms that, allow us to, like communicate or do things like we're doing right now, or also the platforms that, people can be bullied on. I think that, what I mean? Like when people feel like there's not, like opportunity, that factors into it. I mean, we have like a society that's pretty unequal. I mean, we have like a society where like some people are, like a handful of people are doing very, very well. And, like we continue to develop new research and technology. We continue to like make these big strides forward, but like not everyone's getting like pulled along with that, so it's like there's a widening gap. And I think that, what I mean? Like, we went through this COVID epidemic, and, like, it just seems like it's like a million things hitting the fan at once. I just know that, when I was growing up, it didn't seem like this,
Just really quickly, and I was Doug. This is slightly changing, but still dealing with perceptions and all along those lines. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and we were remembering some of the great war movies, and they definitely gave a lot of testosterone boost, whether it was Apocalypse Now or Deer Hunter or a number of other ones. But sometimes it seems like the military doesn't have the respect that it used to have, and all along those lines. So as a veteran, I was just wondering your thoughts as to whether we're doing enough to support our veterans, both when they go off to war, whether it's going off to the Middle East or going off into Europe or a number of other places. I was just wondering, as a veteran, do you think that we as a society are doing enough to support our veteran population?
Well, that's a two-sided question, because I deployed to Iraq and I actually arrived in country April of 2004, medically retired November of 2004 from a deadly near fatal staph infection. I have a Marine veteran son, just got out of the Marine Corps just over 6 months ago from Camp Lejeune, mortar transport. He never deployed. However, one spring early morning, I got a phone call, and it was him at 1:30 in the morning, not feeling safe because of a situation with a relationship. But I think, in my personal opinion, I don't know what they do in boot camp. I haven't been in boot camp since 1981. But I think part of the onboard training in boot camp, there needs to be a dedicated 1 week class focused on mental health. Because if some of these people are coming in broke into the military, I guarantee, is going to break them even further. And if they're afraid to reach out and ask for help, I mean, 547 active duty personnel took their life last year alone.
Wow,
and I'm
some
sure
serious
that
numbers in everything.
I'm sure that number will be there somewhere at the same, maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher at the end of this year. So, in my opinion, I personally don't. I know they do some mental health on the transitional out process, because I asked my son that. I think just much more needs to be done. I think a lot more focus really needs to be placed on a mental health check going in, because because of my attempts, when I re-entered the Michigan Army National Guard in October of 2002, I had to sign a disclaimer because of my mental state prior, stating that I would not go back, my family would not go back on the military if something was to happen to me because of my mental capacity.
Wow. Just along those same lines, and it's actually for both of you, but I'll start with you, Chris, and everything. Do you think that we do a good enough job in terms of training people about coping and coping mechanisms? Because I think that even in our school systems, we don't do a good enough job of teaching people a number of skills. Even this network, Pod TV, was founded because the two founders feel that we don't teach enough around fiscal literacy, and I would argue we don't teach enough about coping skills. Because I remember as a grade school kid, you would learn some of those coping skills and even socialization skills by playing in the playground. And I'm not sure that enough of our youth are doing enough of those kind of events. And I was even talking to one of my people that's renting the facility here, and we were talking about sports. And I'm not even sure that there is enough coping mechanism being taught in the baseball and other levels as well. But Chris, I'll start with you, but I want to hear from you as well, Doug.
Yeah, I don't I don't know that that's getting, like taught to anybody. I think that, it's like I hadn't even thought about, obviously, like I would say that, like suicide, you know what I mean, is, an epidemic in the country. But, I know that, there are therapy and, prescription, like sort of resources, but I don't remember the last time anybody, brought up like, what do we do, with young people to try to, like teach them to, deal with, like a situation or accept a situation, I just don't think that's a blind spot is what it seems like to me.
What is your thoughts around that, Douglas, and everything? And y'all have to excuse me because I am multitasking and everything. So you might see me off screen just for a hot second, but keep the dialogue going because I'm definitely enjoying y'all's conversation, even when I pop off and everything. But definitely if you have your thoughts about that as well.
So for somebody being a veteran peer support specialist that teaches individuals how to get coping skills, a lot of people don't really realize that doing anything that you enjoy is a coping skill. People just think, oh, it's my hobbies, but things like journaling, most people don't understand that journaling actually helps redirect your serotonin and oxytocin in the back of your head to balance out. So that way you're feeling good about yourself. Same with coloring. Coloring redirects. Listening to specific music is a coping mechanism. Some people, when I get upset, which isn't as often as it used to be, but sometimes I'll find rock and roll on the radio and I'll just blast it out for a few minutes. So in terms of sports, I played sports my whole life up until I got hurt in Iraq. And yeah, definitely in sports, I don't know what goes on in the locker rooms, what goes out on the football, baseball diamonds, basketball courts, wrestling, soccer, tennis, swimming. But I just think that as early as we can place a focus on mental health awareness, knowing the 5 signs. I have a shirt under this that says knowing the 5 signs, that the VFW is proud to be behind. And it all starts probably back in maybe 4th or 5th grade of teaching these young future leaders that it's okay not to be okay, but it's important to reach out when you're not feeling safe. And if we make a concerted effort as a society, we're all human. This is America. Yes, we have our beliefs, we have our viewpoints, but we're all the human race. And if we're not taking care of each other, who is? Someday we're going to meet our maker, and we're going to have to answer that call. So in terms of in the sports industry field, for especially early sports, I think it would be who of the school administrations, of athletic associations, to really focus, because there's a lot of peer pressure. If you come from classy families who place a lot of pressure on you to do better than good in sports because of your name specifically, I really think, my personal opinion is that some of these names in the arena of sports, if they're not performing, that puts a big toll on their mental state when they're done with the game, whatever that sport is. And I don't know if Chris, did you ever play sports back in high school?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm still athletic. I mean, I'm like a like a strength trainer. I do a lot of deadlifting, squatting, bench pressing. I mean, that's my main hobby is like hitting the weights. And I mean, like as far as we're talking about coping skills, I mean, like you're right on. I mean, it's like like hitting the weights is a coping skill, playing the guitar is a coping skill, turn on music's a coping skill, writing's a coping skill. Yeah, I don't know, like where young people are getting, like instruction on, like how to, like pivot away, like, say like, look, man, like this is what's going on. I accept that. Now I'm gonna like pivot and do something, you know what I mean, that consumes my attention, and it is what it is. I mean, it's like, I feel like,
speaking of which, and really quickly, just pivoting again slightly the conversation, but how much has music influenced you? Because I know, Chris, you are definitely in the music space. You have been a punk rocker. I don't know if you're still in a punk rock band, but how much has that influenced you? And I know sometimes there used to be this notion, even around the 60s, and I would argue there were other periods, even maybe the 80s and 2000s, where people had good things to say, but also sometimes bad things to say about what people sometimes call counterculture, and all along those lines. And punk rock was definitely part of a counterculture movement. So I just wondering what your thoughts are and what your definition is of counterculture, and do you feel that punk rock or even grunge rock is a part of counterculture?
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, look, when I was growing up, it's like, like I started skateboarding. I mean, that was the other thing is like, I was always doing something athletic, I was always playing some, sport, you know what I mean? But I mean, like I started skateboarding, I started listening to like the skate bands that, were, like I'd see them in, like the skateboarding magazines like Thrasher. And so, I mean, I started listening to like, to pretty strictly just kind of boilerplate, simple punk rock music. But it's like, it has there's a message there. It's definitely the counterculture. It's definitely the, like middle finger, to, authority, ethos there, and so it gave me, I mean, it informed a lot of the way that I thought about the world. I mean, what I took away from, like that is, like injustice and inequality in the world, and like how wrong that is. I grew up, and it's like, like I learned to play some instruments, and I don't just listen to like like a 4-piece punk rock band where they play like 3 power chords over and over again. I mean, I listen to like a lot of like ska and like reggae, a lot of like like 60s like psychedelic rock, and listen to some heavy metal. But it's like I just like music. It's like like at this point, it's like I'm just always trying to find something new to listen to, and it's a huge, like I said to the prior point, coping mechanism. So
yeah, but how do you balance that? Because some people would think to themselves, and I know that's part of even of your public relations stuff that is sent out about you and everything, Chris. But some people will say to themselves that on one hand, this is a man that grew up in counterculture, which is sometimes seen as being quote unquote anti-establishment, but your day job is you work for the prosecution office. And a lot of people would say that that is as establishment as you can get. So how do you balance that skills and everything? Because some people will be going like, how does he go from being anti-establishment to the prosecution, which is very much pro-establishment and all along those lines?
Well, I've got a stock canned answer for that. So I went to law school, and I had been involved in, like, I was a paramedic before, and I worked at the ER for a while, and I'd always been involved in like workplace issues. I've been involved in unionization, organized, labor, etc. I was a Teamster when I was a medic, and I was in SEIU when I worked at the hospital. I went to law school to become a workers' rights lawyer. And that's what I did for like several years. And what I represented were like workers that were suing their employers because of discrimination, because of wrongful termination for some sort of protected activity, or because the employer had like stolen their money, wage theft. And, and I was out on my own. I did it myself for a long time. So I really kind of, I guess, was about as counterculture as you can get in the profession. But I also wanted to develop, like good trial skills, and the opportunity to go to work at the city attorney's office popped up. And I didn't care so much about being a prosecutor as I cared about, like professional development. I do think that, that you kind of like, you come to a space in your life where it's like, this is, these are the ideas I grew up with, you know what I mean? But you know what I mean? Like, at some point you kind of like recognize that, there's got to be some, some guidelines. There's got to be some, some guardrails up, you know what I mean? Because I never, like, anarchy was not something I ever got from punk rock. Like what I got was, like a sense of, like injustice in the world. And, putting up some rational guardrails there, you know what I mean? Like makes sense. Like everyone thinks that we're the bad guys and defense attorneys are the good guys, because, they're trying to get, these, people that, have committed these crimes or not committed these crimes off. But it's like, like I work in the DV unit as well, or I should say I work adjacent to the DV unit. And it's like, we are like, providing a service to like victims of domestic violence, and it's like, there's nothing, inconsistent with my belief system that, that would bar me from, like saying, hey, that guy should not beat his girlfriend up, like that's not okay. You know what I mean? So it's like, I view it from the perspective of, like if you're looking at it, you know what I mean? From this angle, you know what I mean? Like, like it's completely consistent. You know what I mean? Like if I was 15 and some guy was at the skate park and he was beating on his girlfriend, I would probably go beat on him. You know what I mean? So we're doing the same thing in city attorney's office. We're just not beating them with our fists. You know what I mean? So
that makes a lot of sense. But Douglas, and this is actually to you, and it's a kind of similar question and everything, because when we think about people that live by rule of law and order and all along those lines, that is usually the military, and all along those lines, because definitely that is what is indoctrinated into many people in the military when they first go in. Part of this notion of having to follow certain rules and certain regulations and everything in that space. And of course, there's always that conversation about join whatever branch you want to join, because you get to travel and see the world, which we know you do get to see, but maybe not as much as you would do as a tourist, even as a citizen, because a lot of times y'all are there on duty. And I'm just going to tell you, Douglas, in all honesty, I've got some friends that are, Douglas disappeared, so hopefully he'll come back. But I was going to say, I've got some friends that have been in the military, and they can be some of the most revolutionary people that I know in all of that space. So we'll see if Doug makes a return trip. But that's where I was going with that, is that I know some military folks who are going to be quite revolutionary. So we'll see if he makes a return trip. But while I'm waiting to see what he comes back or not, and all along those lines, I was just wondering, in your own conversation and your own thoughts, do you think there are some misconceptions that people have about the Pacific Northwest, just Tacoma and Seattle? And if so, what are those that people have? Because you are from that part of the country, and I know that there are misconceptions you have about the South. There's some people that think that we in the South still are a hick society, even though in my mind, North Carolina is really about 4 different kind of states in one, because going to Asheville is not the same as Charlotte, and where I'm at in
Yeah.
the middle of the state in what we call the triangle is much different than the triad. And of course, there are some very conservative areas as well that are very pro-Trump, but we also have some very pro-Biden kind of people as well. So it's just a mixed bag
Yeah.
here in this particular state in my mind. But I just wanted your take on Pacific Northwest culture and Tacoma and Seattle, to be exact.
So misconception. I guess the misconception would be that people think that everyone in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle is are passive aggressive.
Right.
This is like a prevalent like misconception. It's like, like it's got nicknames. It's got like, like called like the Seattle Freeze, and the fact of the matter is that, like I grew up, like in Seattle and Tacoma, like, in the, 70s, like, like I was born in the mid 70s, grew up, like in the 80s. And it's like, when I was growing up, Seattle was a lot smaller. And most of the people in Seattle were people that were, like born here. And, there are a lot of them blue collar workers. So you're talking about like, like timber workers, logging industry, Boeing. By like the 1990s, the technology like population boom started to happen around here. And as far as I can tell, when I was growing up, I mean, the sort of people that you see around Seattle when I was, like a kid were, like I said, the guys in the logging booths and, like people that had just come from like, like the, the Boeing factory, and it was I mean, it was definitely skilled labor, but like but it was a lot more of like a like a blue collar vibe, you know what I mean? And those people weren't passive aggressive at all, you know what I mean? Like like growing up, like I guess what I'm trying to say is that like when I'm talking to someone that was born here, that grew up around here, they communicate very differently. To me, it's like like the people that moved into the Pacific Northwest in the 1990s that brought the passive aggressive behavior, you know what I mean? So I think it's more of like a socioeconomic like thing, you know what I mean? Like like the defense attorneys that like work at the Department of Public Defense, almost all of them are like like kids that they recruited from Ivy League schools and like, from like Harvard and Yale. And it's like everyone who works in the prosecutor's office, we all went to like state schools. We went to like UW, and, it's like, like we're municipal workers. It's like, like we, like relate, like the way that you would expect people to relate, but it's like all of the defense attorneys, like I feel like bring a certain, like, my shit don't stink attitude, to, and it's like, so I mean, I see it, like there, I see it at work. I see it like in my wife's industry and technology. And it's like, I think it's a bad rap. It's not people from the Northwest. It's people that came to the Northwest.
No, I've definitely seen those transplants and everything. Doug, before you popped off, I don't know if you heard my question, but I was just saying that, definitely the military is known as definitely rules and recognition. And of course, we know politicians oftentimes talk about law and order, and definitely a lot of times people associate the military with that kind of attitude as well. But as I was saying before you popped off, I've seen some serious radicals in the military and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take about that misconception, because I've known some people that had some, I would even say, socialistic and other kind of views, and definitely were counterculture. They were even part of the military. So I don't think that it is a necessarily true stereotype that y'all are all prim and proper and all regimented, for lack of a better term. But I would love to hear your take on that, because I do think that sometimes people thinking that y'all are all being regimented, and I've known some military folks that would scare you in the sense of not being regimented.
It's funny you say that, because I was in the Navy first before I went to the Michigan Army National Guard. Navy was more of a gym class of rules. When I went to Great Lakes, Illinois in boot camp, it was more of going to gym class than anything else. Where I know in the Marine Corps, what I've heard from my Marine vet son is that the Marine Corps, you got yelled at before you even joined. You were getting yelled at. I watched that. I witnessed that with my son before, when he was a poolee, before he even shipped off to Paris Island for boot camp for 13 weeks, I watched how his recruiter, they yelled at him all the time. They didn't talk to him. And it's odd because you're talking about a young man that didn't like rules. It was a hard life. For most of the time, I had to do a lot of drill instructor voice on him to get him to engage, mind you. But on the other token, I appreciate, that's what I missed about the military. That's why after my second attempt, I went back in the military, because I missed that discipline structure. I didn't have that in my life. My late grandfather was gone when I was 15, and I didn't serve a lot of years in the Navy, just 3 before I came back home. So I really didn't have a lot of strict discipline of rules, but I appreciate how I respect other people, how I respect myself. That's something I lost for quite a while after my attempt. Was I lost respect for myself, and I got it back real quick. Even I didn't go back. Yeah, I didn't have to go back to boot camp, but still, when you got people telling you what to do and you say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. If you don't want to play by the rules, you'll be down doing push-ups.
Yeah, that's very true and everything. I did, as you were mentioning the Great Lakes, I did have a story to share about the Great Lakes because I went to school, as I mentioned in the early part of this show, at Marquette, which is in Milwaukee. And of course, Great Lakes is not that far from Milwaukee. So I do remember that, a lot of times, whether it is city-town conversations, because, a lot of times the people that are born in a city will oftentimes not have the same respect for people that are coming just to go to college. We see that here in Durham, even with Duke and those that are born in the city of Durham. And of course, that was a whole notion of kind of the movie around School Days and a couple of other movies that have had that theme as well. And I was just as guilty of that, even though I wasn't from Milwaukee. But I do remember running into a couple of Navy people that were coming from that particular base, and they wanted to know how to get to Marquette, and protecting my own young ladies that I might have been trying to pursue and everything. I gave y'all the wrong direction. So I sent y'all back to UWM. So they said, which way is it to get to Marquette? And I'm like, it's that way, when it was literally that way. So I was like, nope, not going to have the military people come and raid my potential lady friends at all along those lines. So I think that they guys figured it out, because I literally watched y'all walk to downtown, and I think y'all realized that I was sending y'all in the wrong direction. And I was a little bit stockier now, so I might have been able to handle myself. But at that time, I was a skinny mini, so I hid, because I'm going like, I'm not trying to take all these Navy guys. So I was not trying to get on the fight, but I also wasn't trying to send y'all in the right direction. So just wanted to share that with you. So I was like, nope, going to send them the wrong way, because I don't want them coming toward my campus. And not that I was a player or anything, because I was far from that. But I knew that y'all might be cutting into what little chance I did have. So I'm like, not going to send any more people to ruin what little chance I had. I'm sure Chris can relate to that as well.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes that just happens. You don't want people to interfere in that sense and all along those lines and everything. Just out of curiosity, because I mentioned my experience, and like I said, I only went to that one house party, and I talked about it at the beginning and everything. But what are some of the good stories that you had from doing punk shows and just being in punk environments? Because I do know that can be a very interesting environment. So I just wondered if you can share a story or two that me and Doug might enjoy. Maybe there was a encounter or something that was fun that happened when you were living that punk life.
I mean, let's go camping one weekend and go fishing. And I could tell you, for like 3 or 4 days straight, I got about 350,000 great ones. But I had like one that always pops up. So this band from Portland, Oregon, called Poison Ideas, extremely, loud, hard, it's like we, in the Northwest, we kind of just assume, their shows are going to be kind of the most violent, the bloody ones, the ones where people get hurt. Right. And, I saw him, I probably saw this band 100 times, but this one time I went to see him at this place that, is right by I-5 in downtown Seattle. It's still there. It's called something different than it was back then. But I was standing there. You were talking about people slam dancing, and earlier, and that's some people are doing. They're dancing, like in a it's rough. You know what I mean? Like people are definitely getting like hit and slammed into, and I was standing on the outside because I was holding a beer. And like it's like one of those bars where it's like they have shows, so they serve you your beers in like a plastic cup. They don't give you a glass because they know that glass is just going to end up broken, and everyone's going to, broken glass is not a good thing to have it, like in a place like that. And I was holding this plastic cup full of beer, and someone came just torpedoing out of the pit, and they just like speared me like dead, like right in the chest, and knocked me flat on my back. But this is weird because I'm left-handed. I'm kind of like, I'm Irish, ancestry. I'm lucky, you know what I mean? Like this is like where like my reflexes and my luck like kicked in. I was holding this beer, and as I went down, I was going onto my back, like flat on my back. I tipped my hand like this, like 90 degrees, and I held the beer upright so it didn't spill when I landed on my back. And these like three people behind me like picked me up and like vaulted me back up onto my feet. And as I came up, I tipped it back 90 degrees, and I had the whole beer when I stood up. And they were like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. So I mean, the beer should have been all over the wall, you know what I mean? But it was all still in the cup, even though I'd gone, like horizontal midair and flat on my back, and then thrown back up on my feet by, like some random people. So it's a pretty good story.
Yeah, that's a good story. I enjoyed that and everything. Hey, Doug, just really quickly, what do you think are some of the misconceptions I mentioned going to school in the Midwest that people have about the Michigan area and all along those lines? I got the misconceptions that people have from Chris, but I was wondering, what do you think some of the misconceptions people have about the Midwest in general, but more specifically the Michigan area?
Some of the misconceptions, people don't know where they're at most of the time. Because when we explain things, we got to do it the right way. We put that hand backwards. We're not in the same state that we're living in. I think a lot of misconceptions for the state is there's a lot of great people. Mm-hmm. There are a tremendous. I mean, the Michigan alone, the state of Michigan has, I don't know how many millions of veterans just by itself. And then you've got a great musicians. Speaking of music, you've got phenomenal musicians that have come out of Michigan. And even here in our hometown of Jackson, Michigan, the young man, Braden Lake, who finished fifth, he is from my alma mater, Little Grass Lake. Wow. Grass Lake is about as big as a couple of parking lots.
Wow.
And look, he finished fifth in the country on a singing competition at 15 years old. Yeah. He just got named to the all-state for athletics, for baseball and football. And so there's a lot of misconceptions. There's probably misconceptions on weather, how we pronounce washing machine, Coke, soda. I mean, you name it.
Yeah, I can definitely see those. And I know one of the other misconceptions, because like I said, I went to Marquette, and sometimes people forget that Marquette is actually in Milwaukee, because I'll have people say, isn't that in Marquette, Michigan? I'm like, no, that's an actual city, whereas the campus is actually in Milwaukee. We have that here in North Carolina too, because a lot of people, and I think that it actually was in the city of Wake Forest, but the University of Wake Forest is actually in Winston-Salem. But people get that confused even here in North Carolina. But I do know I get that all the time, where people thinking that Marquette is in Marquette, Michigan, when it's actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and all in that space. But I do, even to this day, get people that are thinking that it is in that city in Michigan, where it is not, and all along those lines. You know, one thing we talk about on this network and everything, and we still got about another roughly 20 minutes, and we'll wrap up shortly and everything, and there's something I ask all my guests. But one thing we talk about a lot of times is this notion of kind of the imposter syndrome, and both of you are successful and all along those lines, whether you are advocates as you are, Douglas, or whether you're an author and a prosecutor as you are, Christopher, and all along those lines. But how much is that imposter syndrome a problem with you? And if it is a problem, how do you deal with it? Because I know that even in going for jobs and even in going for young ladies, because I'm still 60, I'm still in my early 60s and still in that single space, that there have been times that I've had that inner conversation. And we know with that inner conversation, we can talk ourselves out of situations as well. So I'd love to hear both of you. And like I said, I'll go with you, Doug, first, since I know you got to exit first and everything. But how do you deal with that imposter syndrome, and how do you address that imposter syndrome and all along those lines? Because I do know we can have that inner critic and that inner conversation and talk ourselves out of jobs in a minute. So how do you manage to do that?
So I actually experienced that starting with my book. I mean, in the early stages, I self-doubted myself to accomplish anything in life. I didn't feel like I was good enough to impress the right people to get the right things. And I tried to fit in. I tried to like certain people for certain reasons, you name it, whatever I could do to gain, what they say, how to win friends and influence people. Yeah, mine was how to influence people and win friends. And I think my struggle personally was not believing in myself. So many people tend to not have any faith whatsoever in anything they do. And the greatest faith you can have is believing first you're worthy and you're capable of doing anything you set your heart and mind and determination to. And if I think back, for me personally, if I think back 30, 40 years and look at where I'm at today and where I was at 40 years ago when I first entered the Navy, or just getting ready to get out of the Navy off active duty, I wouldn't imagine I would be on a podcast show. I wouldn't imagine that I would be finishing up a book. And so that whole imposter syndrome has struck me on many levels over quite a few years of my life.
The mute button on. Just really quickly, Douglas, and definitely want to hear from Chris as well, but I know that you're getting ready to go to your other meeting. But one of the questions I get all my guests to answer, so I'll go to you first, Doug, but I do want to hear from you about the imposter syndrome, Chris. But Doug, I get all my guests to give a message of positivity and hope for this global audience, because Pod TV is a global network. I'm glad that Nick Pavleda and Kim Calhoun founded it, and it is a global network. So if you can tell folks how they can reach you, and I do hope to invite you back in the near future for another episode, but if you can tell folks how they can reach you and learn more about this book that you have written, and also a message of positivity and hope, and then me and Chris will continue the conversation for another 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll wrap everything up very shortly. But if you'll let folks know how you can be reached, and any message of positivity that you want to share with our global audience.
So to contact me, Douglas at douglasbrinker.com, douglasbrinker.com on my website, Facebook, Beacon for Hope, the number 4, LLC. That's actually the name of my Jeep. And a friend of mine and I, who's a fellow comrade, we several years ago brainstormed how can we come up with a great tagline for the word hope. And we both were throwing around a lot of words, and we came up with this: helping one person every day. Helping one person every day find purpose, find meaning, find value, because you do matter. You matter always, regardless of how your circumstances lead you. Hope is real, even in the darkest times, and I am living proof of that.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. Like I said, me and Chris will continue the conversation because I can definitely see you're moving and all along those lines. But do know that you will be invited back, and actually, Chris will be invited back as well. But we'll continue the conversation for about another 10 or 15 minutes. But I greatly appreciated you being on. And if there's any parting words that you want to say, you can definitely have the time to do that before I get to Chris and hear his thoughts around the imposter syndrome as well.
Well, I invite anybody to believe in the impossible and believe in yourself first, because you were put on this earth for a reason. And whether you know that reason currently or you're still discovering that reason, go out and be a beacon for hope for other people, because you never know, the lives you touch, the lives you save might be your very own family.
Very true. Well, I definitely appreciate you, Doug. And like I said, I will be reaching out to you, and hopefully we'll get you back on another Wednesday or Monday. But I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the insights that you gave. So definitely appreciate it and look forward to having you back on a return trip in the near future.
Well, thank you, Mark. Chris, great meeting you. And as the football season comes up, go blue.
I hear you. All right.
All right, man. It's good to meet you too.
All right. Cool. So, Chris, what is your thought around the imposter syndrome and all in that space? Because, like I said, we got about another 15, 20 minutes to go before we wrap everything up. But definitely, I'm just wondering your thoughts around that imposter syndrome, because I do think that it is a problem that we don't talk enough about. But I was wondering whether that's something you even dealt with, because, like I said, even when I read your bio, I saw all these different things that you went through that I alluded to at the very beginning, and all in that space and everything. But I was just wondering how you've dealt with it and what advice you would give to people that are fighting that imposter syndrome and that self-critic.
Well, Doug mentioned football season, and I'm not a huge football fan, but I can tell you who's not imposters is the future national champions, UW. So, so I guess time will tell whether I'm right about that or not. But yeah, I went to UW, so it certainly looks like there's a pretty good chance of winning a national title. So. And it's a football school. I mean, football is certainly is the tail that wags the dog around here. So, the imposter syndrome. I'm kind of two minds here, because the thing is that it's like, and I think a lot of people probably feel like this. It's like when it comes to writing, or when it comes to practicing law or whatever else it is that I'm doing. It's like I feel like I'm I'm great at this. The stuff that I do is great. The quality of my work, the quality of my writing, this, that, you know what I mean? Like my skills in the courtroom are great, but at the same time, you know what I mean? You always feel like you're pretending, or everybody else knows more than you do. Or, there's this kind of wanting to be, or feeling like you should be at the top of the heap, but also wanting to hide beneath it, is, I think the other, the two sides of the imposter syndrome. And, for me, I kind of know when I'm not dealing with it well, when, I start to become kind of, robotic, or, scripted, or start to, be not myself. When it took a long time. I'd been a lawyer for quite a while when I started to work at the city attorney's office, but civil lawyers don't spend a lot of time in courtrooms, and the city just kind of throws you into a courtroom and says, figure it out. They kind of throw you to the wolves. And I remember, back then I used to, do a lot of things, speak more formally, kind of, stand when I'm speaking and try to make it, appear as though I know what's going on more than I do. Now, you know what I mean? I feel like I've got the hang of it. And it's like, I know that, I'm working against that imposter syndrome when I don't know the answer to something, if I just keep being myself, you know what I mean? If I just keep, you know what I mean? If I just admit, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. Whereas when you earlier on, you might be like, I don't know what they're talking about. I need to really pretend like I know what's going on right now, and that's not genuine. What's genuine is, I've been around here. I know what's going on. You're talking about something I don't really know the answer to, and I don't really care. You know what I mean? I need to ask the question anyway, so that's when I know that, you know what I mean? When I'm being my genuine self, you know what I mean? That I'm succeeding with not falling into that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that makes
I
a
think
lot of
everything
sense.
like that.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. Really quick, because I had not even heard of this term. And speaking of things that you don't know and everything, but apparently your books fall under a subgenre. And I know there's all kinds of subgenres. I think one of you earlier, with you actually mentioned horror and the fantasy and science fiction. I've actually been judging a film festival that deals in those genres and all along those lines. But I don't think that I've ever heard of this term of transgressive fiction. So I'm not even sure what that is. So this is one of the cases of me asking to learn myself and everything. So exactly what is
Yeah.
transgressive fiction? Who else is in this type of genre, and exactly what makes a fiction style transgressive?
Yeah, no, there's no reason to know because there's only like five people, like like five authors that are even, I think, kind of called that. So like it's I think I mean it's kind of a fluid term because there's so few people doing it that you can kind of like strap onto it, like what you will, but basically there's authors like the guy that wrote Fight Club. His name's Chuck Palahniuk. There's the guy that wrote like Less Than Zero and American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis. A lot of people, my age or slightly older than me, like Gen X, authors, kind of write stories about people that kind of, like get, like self-discovery through odd, a lot of times nihilistic, like self-destructive means, so truths are revealed through, some pretty, like out there, like methods of, like coming to them. And I think that, it's at least for me, it's kind of an outgrowth of like, what I think we call like absurdist fiction or like, like kind of existential fiction. We got like the Camus, like, the Stranger and the Franz Kafka's, the Trial and the Metamorphosis and, authors like that are kind of, like, making social commentary and satire, in kind of a crude sort of, like way. And I think that, transgressive fiction is really just an extension of, what I mean? Like, like doing your satire and your commentary through these means.
That actually raises an interesting question because it's something that I brought up on some other shows with some other artists and creatives. How important do you think it is for creatives to be being involved in social issues and social fights and all along those lines? Because I know that there are some people that are glad when they see artists take a stand, and I know that there are some other people that, whether it's in the creation itself, be that music or drama or literature, they are glad, and then or even outside when they just take a stand independently. And I know that there are others that say that authors should stay in their lane and not necessarily get involved in social justice or in causes and all along those lines. So I'm just wondering, in your mind, how important is it for artists to be involved in the fight for justice, whatever justice is to them and everything?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, and I can say that, like in my like from my perspective, there's a couple different types of, like artists, right? And so there's like 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 you're like Stephen King, you know what I mean? Like, like who, sold hundreds of millions of books, right? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what his politics are, you know what I mean? And he's not going to be served, you know what I mean, by coming out with, like like his political views about this, that, or the other thing, because he has pretty much universal appeal.
Right.
And like a lot of, I mean, it's, actors are in the same space, like some musicians are in the same place, but there's a lot of artists who's, like persona, from the outset is anchored to the fact that they're putting commentary out there, they're putting satire out there, they're putting their political views out there. So, like punk rock music, right? I mean, like, like the inception, the idea of, like punk rock music starting in England in the 1970s is like a backlash to the Tory takeover in their government, and the oncoming Margaret Thatcher's administration, and in America, the backlash to the Reagan administration, and the ethos of the 1980s. It's baked into the art, you know what I mean? There's no disentangling it because you started from that place. I think that like writers like me, you know what I mean, or, you know, like we're putting it front and center, you know what I mean? Like we don't have a platform without, you know, like the ideological platform. So, you know, like that's, I'm never going to have universal appeal, I don't think, because there's going to be, you know, half of the population that's turned off immediately. So, I mean, but for me, that's the only way that I know how to be a writer or an artist. You know, for other people, you know what I mean? Like, especially ones that are doing very well financially, probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I like the way that you phrase that and everything along those lines. Another thing that we talked about goes on this show as well as some other shows, including my friend Coco McMillan show, and she used to be a background vocalist for Gerald Levert, is this notion of show business. And actually, I had a friend that their podcast that airs on Pod TV as well, interludes. But I think they had the expression that it's supposed to be 90% about the business and maybe 10% about the show. And I sometimes wonder if enough of our artists, whether they are authors or whether they are singers or actors and everything, understand enough of the business side of show business. So I was wondering, at what point did you understand the business side, and do you feel that us as creatives, because I consider myself a creative as well, do a good enough job of making sure that we are maintaining the business side of show business?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, from, you know, from my tiny, you know, like corner of the universe, you know, back in like 2002, I had a novel published through a more kind of traditional publishing house. It didn't sell well, you know. The publishing house didn't really take a lot of, you know, effort to, you know, like go out and really like, you know, like get it out there. And so, you know, like when I wrote this book, you know, I sent out some query letters. I looked for, you know, like a standard sort of like, you know, like literary agent, publishing house sort of deal for a couple of months. And then I realized that, you know, like things had come so far, you know, like especially with, you know, specifically, you know, like Amazon, you know, basically making themselves essentially a clearinghouse for books, where it's like you can go and produce your own, you know, like a product, you know what I mean? Both, you know, like for ebook, Kindle, and, you know, like in print on demand format, that, you know, it just made sense, you know, like, I could look for 5 years and, you know, to find the publishing deal that I want, and they may still not go out and sell my book. And, you know, they're going to take, you know, like this much of whatever it is that, you know, that I do make, right. You know, and I can make this myself. And, you know, it's kind of the most like punk rock do it yourself thing to do, is to say, you know, I mean, just like, you know, like bands used to do, like, well, record companies don't want to sign us, so we'll just call ourselves, you know, SST Records, and we're Black Flag, and we'll put our own records out, and we'll go on the road, and, you know, we'll just, you know, do it. So, you know, for me, it's like, you know, like I set up a business, you know, I set up a, you know, I got a business license for the publishing company. I set up a website, you know, I published the books, and that's, you know, that's how I'm doing it. I mean, I feel like, you know, like I have a pretty good grasp of the business end of it because I'm doing it. And when I was in practice as a lawyer for myself, I did all that too, you know, so.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad you said that, because I was actually just talking to the gentleman here that's doing candlelight, and we were actually having that conversation, because I know that even on that same podcast I was talking about, I think it was Interludes, I think they were talking about a name rapper. I can't remember if it was Snoop or one of the other name rappers, but they had made the mistake of doing business as their individual self versus their business self. And of course, that caused them to lose a lot of money in that case, because I do know a lot of times they are thinking, and this is what I've heard, is that you should do business in a business entity and not necessarily in that personal name, because you can actually get burned by doing it in the personal name and all in that space. But as a lawyer, if you could share a little bit about that, because I've heard a couple of conversations where people have talked about how is you need to have, like you just said, a business entity doing business as, in order to get the maximum amount of profits and everything.
Setting up an LLC is pretty easy. I think most places. It's certainly pretty easy here in the state of Washington. So if it's going to like shield you from any, you know, sort of legal liability, you know what I mean, or any of the legal liability at all, you know what I mean, it's worth doing, because it just doesn't take a ton of time, and it's not very expensive. So yeah, I'm definitely a pretty strong advocate of, you know, like, set up a business entity, set up, especially like, you know, like something like a limited liability, you know, like a company or corporation, whatever it is, LLC. So.
Yeah, definitely. Just really quickly, like I said, probably about 5 minutes, if that, and everything. But you have an extensive record collection. I've got a decent record collection, even though moving from place to place, it's not
Yeah.
as extensive as it used to be, but it is building back up. And I know a lot of my music, because I'm a big blues fan, used to be heavily on the blues and the jazz side. But apparently, 90% of yours is punk music. So I was just wondering, of that punk music, if you had any favorites, and if there are any other music outside of punk that you are big fans of. Because I can tell you that one of my favorites, and I've seen him perform several times, is Buddy Guy, who's a great blues guitarist, speaking of the Midwest, out of the Chicago area. And he still got, I think he's in his 80s now. He might even be pushing near 90. But when I've seen him perform, even as recently as a year or two or a couple of years ago, he still had more energy than some 15-year-old and 20-year-olds that I know, and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, who are some of your favorites, and are there some of those even punk folks that might be getting up in age? Because I know Mick Jagger, as a established rocker, is up in age, but he still has a lot of energy as well. So I was just wondering, who are some of your favorites?
I mean, at some point, I'm probably going to. You can probably see here's some of the record collection is over there. That's
Wow.
there's a bunch more all over the room, but there's records on the wall behind me. There's records on the wall all over the place. But I mean, at some point, I'm probably going to expand my blues collection. I definitely I really, really like Robert Johnson, and I like that type of, like guitar, you know what I mean, and singing, like no band really. So at some point, I'm going to expand, out there. But but right now, what I'm listening to a lot is a lot of like 70s heavy metal, kind of they call it like doom metal. Listen to like Pentagram and Black Sabbath and like bands like that. But that my DNA, like where I came from is like skateboards and skate bands. So that's like a lot of American bands. It's like the Dead Kennedys and the Black Flags and the Bad Brains and Minor Threat, and I mean, I'm always going to love that stuff. It sounds a little simple now, you know what I mean? Because it's just like what you listen to when you're like 14, 15 years old. I like a lot of, I definitely went back further and I started listening to a lot of the punk that came out of England in the 70s, which kind of got me to listen to a lot of the oi bands from England, which got me to listen to a bunch of the second wave ska bands, which got me to listening to the first wave ska bands and reggae and Rastafarian, and so I'll go down streams like that where it's like I'll start with okay, I'm listening to these punk bands, who influenced them, these people from England, who influenced them, these people from Jamaica, and just keep following the rabbit hole until it ends. Definitely we didn't talk a lot about, but I like there's a lot of the new wave and the alternative stuff growing up. So there's the gothic stuff, like the Susie and the Banshees and the Sisters of Mercy, things like that too. But yeah, the punk rock, is always gonna be the thing. So it's it's punk rock. It's like Northwest or California, West Coast. It's Black Flag, Poison Idea, DOA. Those are your kind of your Pacific Northwest, or West Coast, I should say, kind of pillars. That I kind of always pivot back to.
Well, there's and there are different classes, just like there are different styles of what I'm getting ready to mention. But there's another musical form that just is in the middle and wrapping up its 50th anniversary, that being hip hop and everything. And I know that there is a heavy West Coast flavor out of LA, and of course there's the Atlanta sound and the New York sound, and there's always the battle as to who came first, the chicken and the egg kind of argument and everything. But I've had the pleasure of talking to some rappers and hip hop artists that were out of the Washington area as well. So I understand that there is a pretty heavy hip hop scene that is there in the Pacific Northwest as well. So I was just wondering if in your early music, and if it's part of the collection, you have any of that style of music, because I know that they are celebrating their 50th anniversary. We just did a exhibit here that just closed about a little bit less than a month ago, and all in that space. But I was just wondering if that's a style of music that you have explored as well.
Oh yeah, and it's I mean, my knowledge there is definitely not as deep as like the other stuff, but you know, like Sir Mix-a-Lot's from here, you know what I mean? So, you know, like everybody had Swass when I was, you know, like growing up. Sir Mix-a-Lot, he's still, so I don't know, his Posse on Broadway video. Broadway is a street that runs through Capitol Hill neighborhood in Seattle here. It's like I've lived there, I was born there, right? And there's this place called Dick's. It's like a hamburger place. It's like the iconic, like, you know, like little chain here in Seattle. And it's in the video, you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, like I've seen Sir Mix-a-Lot at Dick's, you know, like I see, like if I ever, it's like I'll see him roll up in his Mercedes and he has like his whole crew with him and they'll get out and go to Dick's. You know, Sir Mix-a-Lot, obviously. Macklemore's from here, you know, so, you know, he's kind of more current, right?
Yeah.
I mean, West Coast, I'd like other West Coast hip hop. I definitely like Ice Cube. I like NWA. I like Snoop Dogg, you know what I mean? I like Dr. Dre. So, you know, I don't have a lot of chops when it comes to the East Coast rappers, but there's a lot of the West Coast ones that I love.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, one of the things that when I was in school and even when I worked at a newspaper was talked about with this notion that as a society continued to grow, that it would be more blending of music. I've got a friend that's a funk musician, very much into George Clinton and Parliament and Funkadelic. And even he talks about just good music and being a supporter of good music. And I think that was even a famous jazz artist. I can't remember whether it was Miles Davis or John Coltrane, but they were asking him to define his music. And he basically was given an answer that he just liked to provide good music and didn't like it to have a label and all along those lines. But I just wondered your thoughts about that. Do you feel that our musical genres are becoming more blended? Because I've been feeling that way for decades, that a lot of the sounds are blending together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and like, you know, like I like George Clinton, I like Parliament, you know, I like you know, I like you know, like there's a good, like, you know, like actual like you know, like LL Cool J in like 1990 made like, you know, like a heavy metal record, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's a band called Body Count, right? You know, there's definitely like always been a lot of like, you know, like punk rock and like kind of thrash and metal crossover with like the skateboard bands like Suicidal Tendencies and DRI. And there's, you know, there's crossover all over the place, you know, and it's interesting. It's like interesting because you get sick of listening to like, you know, like I can have, you know, like 600, you know, like records by like, you know, like bands that sound the exact same, you know, way as like, you know, like a lot of like punk rock music is pretty narrow. It's a handful of like power chords. People are playing on guitars and they're screaming into mics. But when they start to like mix it in, you know, with, you know, like new wave, you know, sounds or like gothic sounds or metal sounds, you get interesting new stuff, you know what I mean? And it's always worth like experimenting. It's always worth like mixing stuff up like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wish that more of that crossover would come into other parts of our society as well, because I know one of the things that we talk about on this network and just in general, even on some of our news shows, is this divisive nature that's going on. We've been seeing definitely a rise in anti-Semitism, but even before that, it was anti-Asian hate and definitely Black Lives Matter and some of the Black hate and some of the Latin hate and everything else. But it definitely seems like we're become a more polarized nation and a more polarized world. But the one time that people are not polarized is when they go hear good music or sometimes just good theater or good other things that are in the creative space. So I wish that some of that unity that we see from creativity would be more in the rest of society. But I just wanted your take on that, because we do seem to be in a very polarized time, but people aren't as polarized when they're in their creative lanes. Because my dad is actually a artist. He does photography and he does some board art and some other styles of art as well. And I can tell you that his audience that comes to see his art is a very eclectic mix. I'll just leave it at that and everything. But I just wanted your take on that, as to whether there could be a way that we could bring some of that unity to the greater population.
I think, you know, to me, I think that, you know, like politics is to blame, you know, like for, you know, like most of the divisiveness. So like I was saying, I grew up in Tacoma, right? And then, you know, Tacoma, I grew up in South Tacoma. It's, you know, like a pretty predominantly like Korean neighborhood. My best friends growing up were like Korean kids, you know, like, and, you know, like, you know, the thing about it is that, so I don't want to say this, you know, it feels like to me, like, you know what I mean? Like the divide, like most people have is, you know, is like framed as, you know, like cultural and racial. And there certainly are differences between cultures and races, you know what I mean? But what I think that, you know, like what I think makes the divide is like manipulation from, like people with political agendas. And a lot of times I think that is strictly has to do with like, like money, socioeconomic status, and power. And the thing is that most people that are in like, the space of, I'm an attorney, but I work for the city of Seattle. I'm not a millionaire, I'm a municipal employee. And it's like, I feel like, like most people that are, like in the space of being, just kind of normal people have more in common with everybody else, but like, like people in like, like political spaces or in more socioeconomically privileged spaces, generate, like manipulatively, like generate things to, to play, like people off one another. And one of the places where they haven't really been able to like accomplish that, as you pointed out, is like in art and music, like where, you see, people, like able to like mix these genres and enjoy things from different, like cultural perspectives independent of that, so it's like you have like an example, something where you see like, like, look, this works perfectly fine. You know what I mean? Like when you take, like, this, manipulation coming from people that have an agenda to keep people divided out of it,
No, I definitely agree with you on that. You mentioned earlier that your wife was in the computer field and all along those lines. And the other thing that I've heard people talking about a lot lately is AI, and definitely that was even part of the Hollywood conversation and the recent Hollywood strike and everything. But I just wonder, because I'm sure that even when y'all are home together, maybe even if you've got kids, and I don't remember if you said you did or not, conversations with the folks that you know in your circles, and you did mention that she was in IT. So I'm just wondering, do you feel that AI and even some of the social media is a part of what's going on with our way of division as well? Because I am a big fan. I'm doing a live stream, so definitely I'm a fan of live streaming. I'm even a fan of Instagram and LinkedIn and a number of other social media sites. But I've also gone to restaurants where I've literally seen people having more conversations with their friends on social media than they were with the family members that they were hanging out with, and all along those lines. So I just wondered your take on that, and even your perspective as one that is attached through marriage to somebody that is in that field.
So sum it up for me again. I didn't quite get the question there.
I was just wondering your thoughts around social media and the impact of social media, and whether it is a positive or negative within society. Because like I said, I do remember your wife was in that field, and I don't know if she works for Facebook or one of the other major ones, because I know there are a lot of ones that are there in the Midwest. I mean, the far west.
Yeah, it's a hard question, because it's got, like a couple different answers. Because the thing about it is that like when I think about, I've lived about half my life in kind of a analog world, and now I've lived about half my life in, like a pretty like connected, like technology based world. And the thing, what I mean, like, like I love about, like now versus then, is that, like there's ready access to information. So like, like things when I was a kid, I would just sit and wonder, I wonder, what the answer to that question is. Who was in that movie? Who wrote that book? What was that thing? Where's that place? You don't have to think about that anymore, because you can just get on your phone or get in front of your computer and you can find out like now, The other thing though is that, what I mean, like, like your work issues you an iPhone, what I mean? Your work gives you a laptop, what I mean? Like you're supposed to be connected all the time. As far as like social media, it's like, like it gives you like, like it helps like, like people like me, and other technology platforms, that people like you and me, like, like kind of circumvent, like systems that we wouldn't have access to, like, like you wouldn't, 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't probably have access to be able to like, like put on a podcast, because, there's a handful of radio stations, and that's where, like people do things like this, what I mean? So like access, what I mean, is good, what I mean? But on the other hand, like Facebook is full of, and it's like, I don't think all people are like this, but a lot of people are like this. And this kind of goes to the prior question about like, like people being able to, like get along, and the divisiveness. There are genuinely like ignorant people in the world. And, like if you give them, something, like kind of ridiculous to run with, like, like things that are just, like patently like not true, but are being framed as news, or facts, what I mean? Like, like you generate, like a lot of, runoff, like ignorance and divisiveness too. So it's like, has it been a net gain or has it been a net loser? I don't know. You know what I mean? I like, I like access. I like information. I like the ability to, like do an end run around, having to get a record company or a publishing house or, a radio station. But at the same time, we're talking about, like ignorance. We're talking about divisiveness. We're talking about bullying. We're talking about going back to the conversation about suicide, right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like you said, it's an interesting question. It's the only one we've even been talking about here on the network and everything. I'm gonna give you a full screen. Like I said, I went actually a little bit over than I thought I would. But I was there really enjoying our conversation. Like I told Douglas, hopefully you'll come back. But definitely, I will want you to give how you can be reached. If you got any other closing thoughts about your book and everything along those lines, and any message of positivity and hope that you want to share with the audience as well. So I'm gonna give you the full screen, and if you want to share both how you can be reached, any final words you've got about your own projects and everything, and of course that message of positivity and hope. And then after that, I'll give a couple of these PSAs, and we'll call it another episode of the Online Dinner Party. But I found a good time at dinner with Douglas and Chris on this particular episode, and I hope they'll make a return trip. But right now, I'm getting ready to give you the full screen.
Yeah, I'll definitely, I'll come back anytime you want. As far as, reaching me, pretty easy to reach. The best way to get a hold of me is probably through the publishing house's website. So that's blandcoffeepublishing.com. And the books are 3 novellas. They're Sleeping in the Daytime, Courting Mediocrity, Squatting in the Shadow of an Ant. They are combined in a volume in a hardback as the complete Down and Out in Seattle and Tacoma series. They're available in the individual novellas on Kindle and as paperbacks. So you can definitely you can shop at the website. And if you search Chris Stockwell, you're going to find me on Facebook. You're going to find me on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find. The email for the publishing house is info@blandcoffeepublishing.com. As far as a message of hope, I would just say this is about all I know, and I learned this mostly in recovery. I'd say I probably learned this, from here's the thing is that I can't do anything about what happened yesterday, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The only thing I have any control over is like right now. I personally find myself looking ahead to a couple weeks, a month, a year, and trying to figure out how things are going to go, and becoming anxious about it. And so part of my recovery from anxiety is to just stay in the moment. There really isn't anything that I can do except for the next thing. And when I focus on that one next thing, all the other things don't seem so scary and bad.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that advice and everything. As I was wrapping up and thinking about it before I hit these PSAs and everything, I did have to ask you just one other quick question, because thinking about TV and pop culture and everything, I was a fan of Quantum Leap, and there was a popular actor named Dean Stockwell. So I was just curious if there was any relationship or anything along those lines, because he was part of that area, and I think he was originally from the New Zealand area, or at least he passed in New Zealand. I think he might have been born in Los Angeles and everything, but Stockwell is somewhat of a common name, but not all that common, and he was a child actor. But I was just wondering if Dean, who passed away 2 years ago, had any relationship to you and all along those lines.
I think it's possible. There's also a neighborhood in South London that's called Stockwell. My my mom has done a lot of work on genealogy, so I actually do have a pretty extensive family tree I can look up. But I will tell you that I was sad when Dean Stockwell died, and I loved Quantum Leap. I'm a science fiction guy, and I was growing up when that was on. That was my favorite show, that and Star Trek Next Generation. That's what I watched, So yeah, super sad that Dean Stockwell died. Yeah,
I'm definitely a fan of Quantum Leap. Another one that I was a fan of that was one of those science fiction ones, and I can't think of the actual title of it, but it was the one where the news early edition, where the newspaper would come.
Oh yeah.
That was
Oh, I was going to tell you, you were asking about like like AI, Chat GPT. There's their Netflix show Black Mirror.
Yes.
This last season, they had the episode with Salma Hayek in it that was about like the completely AI generated like television show within a show within a show within a show. That's good watching. So
good. I've seen some of the Black Mirror episodes. I haven't seen that one. I did see the one where they were almost like doing a game show type episode, and I think that was like in season 2 or something like that, where they were literally in they were all in the same kind of environment and everything, and it had like this game show kind of environment going on. And I do remember that episode very much in detail. Well, one of the things I'm a big fan of is teachers and mentors. I've been having that conversation. So one of the BSAs, I think I'll go out with this, is a spoken word piece. You're perfectly willing to stick around if you want to. And then I've got one that honors educators as well. But I think we'll close out with this piece that a friend of mine's friend did that honors teachers and coaches, as well as a award show that honors not just the teachers, but also honors the janitors and the support staff and all of that comes out of Oklahoma, speaking of other parts of the United States, and all in that space. So like I said, if you want to stick around, you can, but if not, you can perfectly be willing to step out, because I think the poem is about 3 minutes and the other piece is 55 seconds. But it's been a great talking to you, and I look forward to having you back in the near future on another episode. But I enjoyed talking to both you and Douglas, and hopefully I'll get y'all back along with some other guests, because sometimes it can be one-on-one, sometimes it can be one-on-two, as it was today, and sometimes if I'm having other things going on, I even let the guests interview themselves, as you and Douglas did, and all in that space. So it's just like a typical dinner party. I never know where the conversation is going to go, and it also depends on where I'm at, whether I'm doing it from my home office or one of my offices, and in this case, it was an office, and all in that space. So definitely look forward to seeing you back in the near future. But right now, we're going to go out with this particular poem about the importance of coaches and mentors, and also that award show. And I might get one other one in as well, but definitely look forward to seeing you back in the near future.
Will do. Thank you.
No problem.
The difference between thinking and doing and living in the 21st century. They teach us about being a real quarterback-oriented games. We don't have to just use video games and live in the shadows of good things because of them. We grow up with agility far larger and bigger than we are tall. Parents are the champions and have to be our first life coaches and know-it-alls. Who knows how this came to be? Coaches will ask you if you know your right foot from your left, if you know yourself, if you act knowingly good or bad, if you can move and negotiate a field with style and form, if you can tackle or throw a pass, or if your last name is that of a clown, if you can let someone know on the team that you are in trouble before you cause yourself or someone else trouble. If you are ready to learn teamwork, or aware that you started out today with your pants down, or your sportsmanship was left on the kitchen table, if you know the social studies, the alphabets, science, music, characters, and the stats and the numbers of a great student player eligible to stay on the team, and if you know the poise of great athletic champions and their scientific attitudes that are historical or music to us now, if you have the swag of the game, the discipline, the performance, and artistic form down pat, and if you have the style of gymnastics that the sport has with life, if you have the work ethic and determination to make it all seem easy and not a game at all, if you have the knowledge of all the above, or you don't know things like this even make the difference. I think that when it comes to the importance of parents and their field and self-knowledge, wisdom, virtues, and courage, Their teachings, love, respect, care that they illustrate on the field and in the grind of life with their actions and their ideas, experiences, muscle, and strategic magic and skills wrapped around us with their priceless love. For their verbs to be that make us winners in this hard and fast third century that without them, kids and adults, athletes could hardly see or do anything at all. Parents teach us the difference between playing video games and playing on the field. Parents teach us how to be champions. A huge hug should go to parents, coaches, and parent-like community people who have love on the field for you and who are champions for your life, both in and out the games.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you. I thank you for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
I won't fold.